future tripping. What? Um, sorry, I just thought of this line my brother had. He was an aspiring rapper once in his youth. Aspiring is a generous term. But one of his lines was, "My shoelaces are tied, so I ain't tripping." So let's all figure out how to tie our shoelaces so we don't fall all over ourselves. And what I mean by that is a lot of us we create our own anxiety and we worry about things that are completely out of our control, things that that we imagine all these worst case scenarios. What happens if I'm worried that, just imagining all these things that could go wrong, things about, if you're worried about money and your future, if you're worried about you ever finding your purpose and living that out, and making an impact in the world, if you're worried about, if you're gonna be able to keep your job. And that was a big thing, with all the things that were happening with COVID, like being able to have job security and take care of the family. If you're worried about, your relationship, if you're going to stay together, if you should get married or not, your health, what's going to happen with your health. There's all these things that we worry so much about. And what happens is when we imagine all these scenarios, we induce our own anxiety and we create our own suffering, right? And suffering by anticipation of what's going to happen is a form of like punishing ourselves for things that might not even ever occur, right? And it's really important to recognize all we have is now. All we've ever had is now, right? And so when we shoot off and we worry about all these things that are possibly going to happen, we create our own suffering. And this is something that, it's very common, right? It's a very normal thing. I mean, I've done this so many times in my life. When I, especially in my early 20s, it's like when I actually moved out of my parents' house, not just like for college, but when I actually moved out for the first, permanently, it was like, okay, I moved out with no income, no job. I had all these fears about, am I going to make rent? Am I going to be able to pay for things? Am I going to be able to get a job? All these worries and all these things that were going on in my head, which, some of them are valid. I'm not saying to absolutely like throw it all out and just like, there is merit to creating and seeing possibilities of things occurring and possibly going wrong so that you can kind of make plans around that and be as best prepared as you possibly can, but only to a certain extent, because we can't control everything. How many times do we make plans and they absolutely just go out the window, right? And when going back to that, like when I left my parents' house, and I was so worried about all these things, like, look, I'm still in that same apartment. I've never missed rent. I eventually did get a job, it worked out for me. And I ended up just fine. But I created all these worries. And sometimes if you look back at your life and all the things that you worried about before, and you're like, why did I freak out so much about that? I just did this recently, like with my knee. And when I tore my meniscus and I got told I was gonna have surgery, all these thoughts flew through my mind, where it's like, oh my gosh, am I not gonna be able to, like, my brother's getting married. I want to dance. I love to dance. I'm not gonna be able to dance. I'm not gonna be able to, like work out, anymore. Like I'm not gonna be able to jump on, the boxes, like silly things that are just coming up, right? I'm imagining all these things, and there's nothing I can actually do. I've already torn it, and I got to go to the doctor next week. There's nothing I can actually do, but I created my own suffering, and I was like super down, for a bit, and thinking about all these things, and I created my own suffering. And the reason that we do things like this is straight up out of fear, right? Our brain doesn't like surprises. It wants to be prepared, and it thinks that by preparing us with all these future scenarios, that gives us some sense of certainty, some sense of knowing, so that we can best prepare. But it's a false sense of security. Going back to what I said earlier, like, you don't know what's going to happen, and as best as you prepare, like, there's still situations where things are, most of the time, like, it's never going to go according to plan, right? And so it's really understanding that life doesn't work like that, and when we but understanding too that like that worry and those fears that are coming up are natural, and honestly you're not really going to be able to change that. That'd be like you just not being human. You're a human having a human experience, and worry and some fears are a natural part of life, but it's understanding how to that is having awareness around the way that you that the way that your mind does that, the way that it runs away with you, and being able to just better handle when it happens. And so one of the things that I've done is really being a lot more present, a lot more present. All we have is now, all we've ever had is now, and really understanding that and having more acceptance and and acceptance of where you're currently at, what the situation is, and acceptance of the fact that you can't control, you've got to let go sometimes, and really just be in that flow of life, really surrender to life, and understand that when those things happen, inevitably, if those challenges occur, those situations that you've imagined occur, that first of all, I tell myself that's future Maggie's problem. That's future Maggie's problem, right? There's no reason to worry now about that because there's nothing I can do about it. And plus, it's imaginary. I've just made it up in my head. I don't really know if it's going to happen. So that's future me's problem, but also accepting that when that thing does happen, that I'm fully equipped with the knowledge and the skills and experiences that I have, that I will be able to handle that situation. So it's having a level of trust and a level of belief in yourself and a level of acceptance, right? But really being able to be present and being aware of what is going on in your body when the mind starts to run away from you, right? Especially if you ever notice, it happens a lot to me when I'm driving, right? Because driving is just so second nature, that that's when a lot of times I notice my worries and things just start to run away with me, or before I fall asleep at night, right? And so it's really good to notice like what is going on in my body when that happens, so that you can be really aware. Like, is there a tightness in the chest? Is there a tightness in your legs? Are your shoulders up and hunched over? Are you having a churning feeling in your stomach? Do you get irritated, right? Like, what are those body cues that indicate to you that you are starting to have that fear, have that worry, have that anxiety? And then notice when your mind runs away with you and how often it does that throughout the day, and gently pull yourself back to the present moment. Something that I do, which might seem a little silly, but I love it, is I tap my nose. Hey, hello, this is reality. Come back to life. And when I do that, I tap my nose, and then it's like a physical little pattern interrupt. And then I start to draw in, like say I'm driving, I feel the steering wheel. I start to draw in the colors from what's around me. I start to bring my senses into awareness and bring myself into that present moment. And that allows me to come back and realize like, hey, I'm future driven and need to come back into this present moment and realize that I can't control what's going to happen is what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, whatever happens is usually for me. It's not happening to me, it's happening for me. And I can be more accepting that the challenges that I face in my life and the things that are going to happen are all part of what's necessary and what's needed for me to happen to eventually become the person that I need to be. A lot of times external forces and things happen to sort of set in motion necessary change. And then just realizing this is the flow of life and really having a lot more acceptance within that, which isn't an easy thing to do. And this is why it takes a little bit of practice. And it's also about like realizing that your mind's kind of like a little kid, it's just gonna run away, it's gonna throw tantrums, it's gonna be scared, it's gonna have all these emotions, and to be able to just give compassion and give compassion to yourself and understand that these are just fears. Understand what your fears are, and give them a name, and just learn to be more present, to be more compassionate, more accepting, and really reiterate that idea to yourself that truly you can't control what's happening and what will happen. And this sounds so simple, but it really is a really hard thing to do because our fear can be so paralyzing, our anxiety can be so paralyzing. But really bringing more awareness and bringing more compassion and just practicing creating this habit of learning to let go and practicing this habit of being more accepting and being more present is ultimately what could help you not get rid of those fears and anxiety, but better manage them. And I think that that is a realistic thing to to do in that situation, right? Um, so stop future tripping, bring yourself back to the present, and give yourself, give yourself some love.